Welcome back, everyone. We are now on chapter 16, the endocrine system. And I am going to make it as simple as I can. So we need only an hour to do this. This is going to be the last lecture. And next time I see you, that'll be on Thursday. You are going to have your exam number 4 in the lecture. So let's move on and take a look at the endocrine system. So, the endocrine system acts with the nervous system. It doesn't act alone. They coordinate and integrate activity of body cells. The endocrine system would influence metabolic activity via hormones transported in the blood. And the responses here are slow, but longer lasting than the nervous system would actually be doing. And so, um, the what do you call this the messenger itself, which is supposed to be the hormone, is delivered in the bloodstream, and it takes a while really for the effect to really come up. Endocrinology is a study of hormones and endocrine glands, and this is a comparison for you to study the and compare and contrast the nervous system and the endocrine system, just so you know that this could be part of your review sheet. So, what are the what scope? How far is the endocrine system acting? Well, it is controlling and integrating the reproduction, the growth and development of the body, the maintenance of electrolyte, water, and nutrient balance of the blood, the regulation of cellular metabolism and energy balance, as well as mobilization of body defenses. So, we have two major types of glands, and well, in AMP1, you were introduced to the exocrine glands. These are glands that produce non-hormonal substances, for instance, sweat glands and the salivary glands. They do have ducts to carry secretion to the membrane surfaces. But the endocrine glands, these are the ones that produce the hormones, and they are ductless. These will be your pituitary gland, your thyroid gland, parathyroid, adrenal, and the pineal glands. The hypothalamus is also known as an endocrine gland, but it's part of the nervous system, so we call it a neuroendocrine gland. Some organs in the body have exocrine and endocrine functions, and these will be your pancreas, your gonads, and your placenta. And other tissues and organs also produce hormones, such as adipose cells, okay, the thymus gland, the cells in the walls of the small intestine, the stomach, the kidneys, and the heart. They do produce specific local hormones. And these are the locations of the main endocrine glands of the body, and we're going to take them as simple as we can in a few minutes. So hormones are long-distance chemical signals. This is the main player in the endocrine gland. They are released by the glands, they travel in the blood or the lymph. And your autocrines or autocrines are chemicals that exert effect on the same cells that secrete them. And paracrines are locally acting chemicals that affect cells other than those that secrete them. And then autocrines and paracrines together are local chemical messengers. Scientists don't consider them part of the endocrine system because of the extent of their effect. So there are two main classes of hormones. Today we're going to come up with and study the amino acid-based hormones and the steroidal hormones. The amino acid-based are amino acid derivatives. These will be your peptides and proteins. The steroidal hormones are the ones that are synthesized from cholesterol, and these are your gonadal and adrenocortical hormones. And a possible third class of hormones, which we call the eicosanoids, is considered a hormone by some scientists, but most classify it really as a paracrine. Now, though hormones circulate systemically, only cells with receptors for that hormones are affected. So even if a good chunk of the hormone is going to be surrounding a cell, if the cell will not have a receptor to receive the hormone, then that hormone will not be affecting that cell. So any receptor or any cell that would have the receptor for a hormone is what you call a target cell. Okay, and hormones can alter the target cell activity. So hormone action on target cells may be to alter plasma membrane permeability or membrane potential by opening or closing ion channels. They stimulate the synthesis of enzymes or other proteins. They activate or deactivate enzymes, and they induce secretory activities, and they also stimulate mitosis. Hormones act in one of two ways, depending on their chemical nature and receptor location. If they are water-soluble hormones, for instance, all amino acid-based hormones, except the thyroid hormone, are water-soluble hormones, they act on the plasma membrane receptors via a G protein second messenger system. Because they cannot enter the cell, they would need some sort of like a second messenger that they could relay their signal to, and the second messenger relays their signal to the nucleus in return. Now, the lipid-soluble hormones, these will be your steroid and thyroid hormones, they act on the intracellular receptors that directly activate a gene. So they can enter the cell, and there they are going to be meeting with their receptors inside the cell. So let's take a look at the second messenger system. And these are specifically for amino acid-based hormones, except the thyroid hormone. And the two messenger systems that we are talking about here will be your cyclic adenosine monophosphate system and the PIP2 calcium. So let's take a look first at the cyclic adenosine monophosphate signaling mechanism. Here, the hormone is considered to be the first messenger. Okay, they bind to the receptor. They will be activated by G protein. Let me see. I think I have a good picture of this. Okay, right there. Okay, you have your hormone here, which is the first messenger, and it is going to dock into its receptor. And once it is docked into the receptor now is going to interact with the G protein. Then the G protein is going to be activated, and after being activated, it activates the adenylate cyclase, and the adenylate cyclase converts the ATP into cyclic adenosine monophosphate, and that cyclic adenosine monophosphate right there happens to be the second messenger. And the second messenger now will activate the protein kinases, and this protein kinases now will trigger responses of target cells. These will activate enzymes, stimulate cellular secretion, they open ion channels. They can do pretty much a lot of things for as long as they are going to be activated by the kinases. Then you have the second type, which is called the PIP calcium signaling mechanism. Now, there is still a hormone-activated G protein, okay, but the effector enzyme is a phospholipase C. The activated phospholipase C will split the membrane protein PIP2 into two second messengers. That will be your DAG or diacylglycerol, which activates the protein kinases, and you have your inositol triphosphate, which is IP3. It causes calcium release from intracellular storage sites. So the calcium ion acts as another second messenger system here. It alters enzyme activity and channels or binds to regulatory protein, which we call calmodulin. And calmodulin, I know you've heard that calmodulin before in AMP1. It's got something to do with, the smooth muscle contraction. Calmodulin here plays a role in in the PIP signaling mechanism. Calcium-bound calmodulin would activate the enzyme that amplifies cellular response. So you have other signaling mechanisms, but I just want you to review the rest of them. But I'm only concerned with two of them: the PIP2, and then the second messenger system signal, the CAMP second messenger system. Okay, so what happens to the one that would probably be lipid soluble? Lipid soluble steroid hormones and thyroid hormones are different. They don't need a messenger system because they can enter the target cell and bind with intracellular receptors themselves. Receptor hormone complex would enter the nucleus and bind to specific region of the DNA. They would help initiate DNA transcription to produce a messenger RNA, which pretty much is already a translation of the message of the hormone itself. Okay, and this is a good, pretty much like a good view of how the second message, the gene activation, direct gene activation mechanism of lipid soluble hormones would happen. First, you have your steroid hormone specifically diffusing right there. It is diffusing, and let me see, I've used my pointer. Okay, it diffuses right in there. Okay, and the receptor hormone complex would enter the nucleus, and as it enters the nucleus, immediately the receptor hormone complex binds to a specific DNA region, and pretty much the binding would initiate the transcription of the gene into the mature tRNA and mature mRNA rather, and the messenger RNA now will be directing protein synthesis. So let's take a look at this one, guys. I'm wondering if we can.
The endocrine system consists of hormone-producing tissues located throughout the body. The circulating hormones control the rates of body processes and maintain homeostasis. Within an endocrine gland, endocrine cells secrete hormones, which diffuse into nearby capillaries. The cardiovascular system transports these hormones throughout the body, affecting target cells in various tissues. Target cells for a specific hormone have receptors that bind the unique three-dimensional shape of that hormone. Cells that lack a specific hormone receptor are unresponsive to that hormone, even if a high concentration of the hormone is present around the cells. Although cells express a variety of receptors, we'll focus on one particular class: receptors that bind water-soluble hormones and exert their effects through the intracellular second messenger, cyclic AMP. These receptors are embedded in the cell's plasma membrane because water-soluble hormones cannot enter the target cell directly. A hormone molecule, acting as the first messenger, binds to its receptor, causing the receptor to change shape. The receptor can now activate specific intracellular G proteins. The activation process begins with the release of a GDP molecule from the G protein in exchange for a GTP molecule. This causes the G protein to change shape and become active. The hormone-bound receptor activates many individual G proteins, which greatly amplifies the signal from a single hormone molecule. An activated G protein diffuses along the plasma membrane until it binds to and activates the enzyme adenylate cyclase. Once active, adenylate cyclase converts ATP to the second messenger, cyclic AMP. These many molecules of cyclic AMP from each activated cyclase enzyme represent a further amplification of the initial hormone signal. The increased concentration of cyclic AMP activates enzymes known as protein kinases. These activated protein kinases phosphorylate a variety of proteins within the cell. This changes the activity of those proteins and generates the cell's hormone response. The cell's response is characterized by the specific proteins present in the cytoplasm, only some of which can be phosphorylated by protein kinase. The cellular response diminishes rapidly once the hormone is no longer bound to its receptor. G proteins hydrolyze their bound GTP to GDP, returning to their inactive state, and dissociate from adenylate cyclase. This ends cyclic AMP production. Existing cyclic AMP is degraded by the enzyme phosphodiesterase, which is already present in the cytoplasm. As the cyclic AMP concentration returns to resting levels, protein kinase inactivates, preventing further protein phosphorylation. The target cell has now returned to its pre-stimulus condition, ready to respond to future hormone signals. The signal of a water-soluble hormone binding to a receptor on the plasma membrane is amplified through the activation of many G proteins and the generation of even more cyclic AMP. This cyclic AMP activates many protein kinases, which affect many thousands of intracellular proteins, all shaping the target cell's response. The response of many target cells produces the homeostatic and regulatory effects controlled by the endocrine system.
Very good. So now let's get into the process of hormone release. Now, the release of hormone is affected by many factors. The first one will be the blood level of hormones. These are controlled by a negative feedback system. Increased hormone effects on target organs can inhibit further hormone release. The levels vary only within a very narrow desirable range, and hormone release is triggered by two things: by endocrine gland stimulus and by the nervous system modulation itself. Endocrine glands are stimulated to synthesize and release their hormones in response to one of the three stimulus. It could be humoral, by the blood or within the blood. It could be neural, that's actually a nervous stimulus. It could be hormonal, or it could be really stimulated by another hormone. And right here, you could see that the humoral, for instance, there's the change in blood level of ions and nutrients would directly be stimulating the secretion of the hormone. An example of this will be your calcium ion. Declining blood calcium concentration would stimulate the parathyroid gland. These four things here are the parathyroid gland in secreting the parathyroid hormone. And in return, the parathyroid hormone will cause the calcium concentration to rise, and the stimulus is removed. The next one is hormonal stimulus. So another hormone stimulate other endocrine glands to release their hormones. These hormones that would stimulate other endocrine glands are what's called tropic hormones. And you have several tropic hormones that are found in the anterior pituitary. This is the pituitary gland. This is your anterior pituitary gland, and that's the posterior pituitary gland. The anterior pituitary gland secretes right here on the example pretty much like three different types of hormones that would stimulate the release of the hormones coming from these endocrine glands. So this will be your thyroid stimulating hormone. It stimulates the thyroid gland to release its hormone, okay? This will be your ACTH here, the adrenocorticotropic hormone. It will be stimulating the adrenal cortex to release the hormones that it is actually producing. And then you have your gonadotropins, which will be the hormones that would stimulate the testes into producing its other hormones. So these are hormones from one gland that is actually stimulating other hormones to release their specific hormones. So there is also what you call the nervous system modulation. Nervous system itself can make adjustment to hormone levels when needed. It can modify the stimulation or inhibition of endocrine glands. Nervous system can override normal endocrine controls. An example of this will be under severe stress, the hypothalamus and the sympathetic nervous system will override insulin to allow blood glucose levels to increase and prepare our bodies for fight or flight. Okay, let's take a look at target cell specificity. All target cells have specific receptors to which the hormone would bind. An example of this would be your adrenocorticotropic hormone receptors are found only in certain cells of the adrenal cortex. So the adrenocorticotropic hormone will only act on the cells of the adrenal cortex that would bear the receptor where they are specific with. But the thyroxine hormone is different. The thyroxine receptors are bound on nearly all cells of the body, and therefore the thyroxine hormone can react and can stimulate and can affect nearly every hormone in the body that would carry the receptor for the thyroxine. So the target cell activation depends on three factors: the blood level of the hormone, the relative number of receptors on or in a target cell, and the affinity or the strength of the binding between the hormone and the receptors. So the amount of hormone can influence the number of receptors for that hormone. For instance, in such a case, a phenomenon which we call upregulation happens when target cells form more receptors in response to hormone levels. Let's say a hormone is very low, so target cells will produce more receptors, okay? And as they produce more receptors, then they are giving way for that very small amount of hormone around them to interact more with the cell because of the number of receptors to offset the low level of hormone. And then downregulation is the opposite. This is when target cells would shed off the receptors if there's too much hormone around them and they don't need the response of the hormones anymore, okay, or the information of the hormones. This will pretty much desensitize the target cells to prevent them from reacting to persistently to the high level, to the effects of the high levels of hormones. So hormones circulate in the blood, either free or bound. Steroid and thyroid hormones are attached to the plasma proteins, and all others will circulate around without carriers. And the concentration of circulating hormone reflects the rate by which it is released and the speed by which it is activated and removed from the body. Hormones can be removed from the blood by cutting them down, degrading them by degrading enzymes, or they are eliminated in the kidneys and in the liver. The half-life is the time required for the level of hormone in the blood level to decrease by 1/2 the original volume. It varies anywhere from a fraction of a minute to a week, depending on the hormone itself. Hormones have different response times. Some are immediate, some are, especially the steroid, can take several hours to days. Some are inactive until they enter the target cells. And the duration of the response is usually limited. They range from 10 seconds to several hours, and the effects may disappear rapidly as the blood level drops, but some may persist for hours at low blood levels. So then again, let me repeat, half-life is actually the onset and duration of a hormone activity, and dependent on the hormone, if the hormone is water or lipid soluble. So here's again a comparison chart which I placed there so that you can study it, guys, for your review. Okay, let's take a look at the interaction of hormones at target cells. Multiple hormones may act on the same target cell at the same time. Permissiveness is an interaction where one hormone cannot exert its effect without another hormone being present. An example of this is your reproductive hormones needing the effect of the thyroid hormone so that they can have that, so that the effect is going to be complete. Now, synergism is different. This is actually the effect of one or more hormone together, when together, will pretty much be amplified. It causes amplification of the effect. They will have, separate effects, but when they are alone, but when they are together, their effects are amplified more than double. Example of this would be glucagon and epinephrine both cause livers to release glucose. Then you have what you call antagonism. It is when one or more hormones oppose the action of another hormone. An example of this will be your insulin and glucagon. The pituitary gland is a small gland. We're now going to get into the different glands, okay? It's a small gland in the brain. It's controlled by the hypothalamus. It is divided into two regions. You have the anterior and the posterior pituitary, and it would secrete at least 6 hormones. I want you to know that the anterior pituitary is a real gland, and the posterior pituitary is not a real gland, and it's a mere storage organ for 2 hormones, and that is the ADH, or the antidiuretic hormone, and the oxytocin that is being produced by the hypothalamus. So here's actually your pituitary gland. So let's take a look at another name for the pituitary gland is the hypophysis. So when you say hypophyseal, you are referring to the hormones of the hypophysis. And you have several hypophyseal hormones, okay? You have the growth hormone, the adrenal, the ACTH, the thyroid, the TSH or thyroid stimulating hormone, the gonadotrophic hormones, the FSH and LH, the melanocyte stimulating hormone, prolactin, oxytocin, then the antidiuretic hormone. I'm asking you, all of you, to read on all of this because I will be giving them in your test. So, the growth hormone of the anterior pituitary will target most cells and body organs, and the function will be to stimulate the growth of bones, muscles, and organs. And there are, though, some homeostatic imbalances or abnormalities. When too much growth hormone is secreted, it can cause gigantism, and too little may actually cause pituitary dwarfism. So I mentioned to you that the pituitary gland is divided into the anterior part and the posterior part. Let's take a look at the hormones of the anterior pituitary. You have the thyroid stimulating hormone, which is a tropic hormone that targets the thyroid gland. The function will be to regulate the thyroid gland secretion, which is T3 and T4, the thyroxines of the thyroid gland. Certain abnormalities would occur when too much of it, okay, the thyroid enlarges, or too little, the thyroid gland would shrink. Okay, so here's actually your thyroid gland interaction. The thyroxine releasing hormone is released from the anterior pituitary, and pretty much it is now going to go and be received by the thyroid gland itself. Right there in your neck is your thyroid gland. It causes the release of thyroid hormones T3 and T4 into the general circulation. T3 and T4 acts on target tissues to produce a response. T3 and T4 also will have inhibitory effect on the secretion of the thyroxine releasing hormone from the hypothalamus. So if you have enough of the T3 and T4, it will have a negative in the negative feedback. It's going to be inhibiting the TSH from being produced. Once you have low T3 and T4, then you are now going to again stimulate the TSH into its release and eventually stimulating the thyroid gland to produce T3 and T4. Then you have your gonadotropins. The luteinizing hormone for the females would target the ovary and promotes ovulation and progesterone production. We will be discussing this more in the reproductive system. So I would suggest that you probably can just go on the surface on studying the hormonal effects of the gonadotropins on the female reproductive system. Now, the luteinizing hormone for the males, the target tissue here will be the testes. The function will be for sperm production and testosterone. Follicle stimulating hormone for females stimulates the growth and development of the follicles in the ovaries, and pretty much, and also estrogen secretion. In the males, it is actually targeting the seminiferous tubules, and the function will be to stimulate sperm production. So the prolactin is another hormone of the anterior pituitary gland. The target tissue will be the mammary glands and the ovaries, and the function will be for milk production. Then you have your ADH, or antidiuretic hormone. ADH is a posterior pituitary gland hormone. It's not anterior. It is a hormone stored there but not produced by the posterior pituitary gland. It is produced by the hypothalamus and is only stored there. And target tissue here is actually your kidneys. The function will be to conserve water. So this one elevates blood pressure. And abnormalities here will be called diabetes insipidus. Okay, and this would be because of low ADH. The kidney will tend to produce large amounts of dilute watery urine, and can lead to dehydration and thirst. Then you have oxytocin. Oxytocin is also a hormone that is produced by the hypothalamus. And the target tissue here is the uterus, and it increases uterine contraction during labor. Okay, so pretty much right here, oxytocin is it doesn't really show oxytocin right here, but this is only a general view of the route for hormones from the hypothalamus going into the posterior pituitary gland and then going into the target tissues. Okay, and this one here, this picture here, will be the picture of the thyroid gland and the parathyroid hormones, the parathyroid glands together. So let's take a look at the thyroid gland. The thyroid gland is one of the largest glands. It requires iodine to function. It requires iodine to help in the maturation of the thyroxine hormones. And the thyroid hormones here would target most cells, and the function will be to regulate metabolic rates and is needed for growth. So pretty much there are some homeostatic imbalances, abnormalities of the thyroid gland. Hypothyroidism would lead to decreased metabolism, weight gain, reduced appetite, fatigue, low temperature and pulse, and dry skin, cold skin, myxedemia in adults, and cretinism in infants. Hyperthyroidism, on the other hand, would result in increased metabolism, weight loss, increased appetite, nervousness, high temperature and pulse, warm, flushed skin, and of course, it will also be leading to Graves' disease or goiter. Okay. Here's another hormone of the thyroid gland produced by the C cells of the thyroid gland, which we call calcitonin. Calcitonin targets the bones, and the function will be when secreted, okay, will pretty much like when blood calcium levels are high. So the aim of calcitonin will be to modulate the levels of blood calcium levels, so they lower it down. Parathyroid gland is located at the inner, at the back of your thyroid gland, in the posterior aspect of the thyroid gland. The parathyroid gland releases parathyroid hormone, and the target tissues here will be the bones and the kidneys, and the function will be to regulate blood calcium level. Okay, if calcium level is low, then the osteoclast will break down. This is actually its effect. If the calcium level is low, then the osteoclast breaks down bone matrix, and calcium is actually lost in the urine. If calcium level is high, then the osteoclast don't break down the bone matrix, and more calcium is actually lost in the urine. The first one is actually less calcium being lost in the urine. The second one is more calcium is actually lost in the urine. So it's only a matter of whether the osteoclast is actually being stimulated or the osteoclast is being inhibited. So right here, when pretty much when the blood calcium level goes high, when it is increased, and then homeostasis is disturbed, the C cells, okay, of your thyroid gland would now increase calcitonin, which is actually the hormone, okay, and the parathyroid gland would decrease the parathyroid hormone secretion. So here, calcitonin is increased, and there's going to be a decreased bone resorption and decreased uptake of calcium from the intestines and the kidneys, and blood calcium levels would eventually decrease, okay, and homeostasis is going to be restored. Now, right here, when blood calcium level would decrease and the homeostasis is disturbed, the C cells would decrease the calcitonin secretion, but this time the parathyroid secretion is going to be stimulated, and in the effect of the parathyroid secretion will be to increase bone resorption and increase uptake of calcium from the intestine and kidney as a result. And the homeostasis for blood calcium level now is going to be restored. Now the adrenal glands. The adrenal glands is actually located or sitting on top of the kidneys, and it's a solid organ. It will have a cortex, which is actually the outer section, and the middle part, which you call the medulla. Now, it is very important that you know where they are, okay, because I will be referring to them in my lecture. The cortex alone right here is made up of several layers of specialized secretory cells. It will have, for instance, a layer that would be secreting mineralocorticoids, okay, and you have that's actually the zona glomerulosa. The zona fasciculata, this large area here, is going to secrete the glucocorticoids, and the reticularis, the zona reticularis, will secrete the androgenic hormones, and these are the ones. And then in the medulla, this is actually the middle section, this will be secreting the epinephrine and norepinephrine, or the adrenergic catecholamines of the released by the chromaffin cells of the medulla of the adrenal gland. So we're going to start with the adrenal gland medulla. The inner portion secretes epinephrine and norepinephrine, and the target tissue will be heart, blood vessels, liver, fat cells. Okay, these are released as part of our fight response. Okay, so the target tissues would release glucose in the liver, increase the release of fatty acids from the fat stores, increase heart rate, decrease blood flow through the blood vessels of the internal organs and the skin, increases blood flow to the skeletal muscles of the heart, and blah, blah, blah. You know this already. This has been discussed when you are in A&P1, so I would like you to review that, because I might just give it again as part of your test on Thursday. The adrenal cortex is the outer portion. That's actually the outer portion. And they, first of all, they secrete mineralocorticoids, aldosterone, which is a type of mineralocorticoid. The target tissue here will be the kidneys. The function of this mineralocorticoid will be to cause sodium and water to be retained and potassium to be secreted. And they are indirectly involved with blood pressure and blood volume regulation. Then you have the cortisol, which is a type of glucocorticoids. The cortisols are secreted by the zona fasciculata cells. Their target tissues will be most cells of the body. They increase breakdown of fat and protein for energy and reduces inflammatory and immune response. Then you have the androgenic hormone. This is actually produced by the zona reticularis cells, and the target tissues will be most cells, and the function will be to pretty much promote the development of most secondary sexual characteristics for males. For females, it is actually our source of libido. Then we have the pancreas. The pancreas is an organ located in the abdominal cavity. It secretes insulin as the endocrine function, but it's also a big exocrine gland. It's the biggest exocrine gland in the body. It secretes pancreatic juice, and you know that from the digestive system. But it would have patches of endocrine group of hormones, which you call the islets of Langerhans, and they are endocrine. They are endocrine in nature. One of the hormones of the pancreas in the islets of Langerhans is insulin. They are secreted by the beta cells, and the target tissue will be your liver, skeletal muscle, and adipose tissue cells. And the function will be to regulate blood glucose level, which means after a meal, blood glucose would actually increase, and insulin is secreted to lower it down. Extra glucose is stored in the form of glycogen. So insulin is actually the one that promotes the delivery of glucose, where it's going to be converted to glycogen, and that will be in the liver. All right. Then you have some abnormalities with the pancreas in the delivery of insulin, and it happens when a person becomes diabetic. And here's an example: the diabetic mellitus. There's too little insulin, or there's probably faulty insulin receptors. The symptoms will be exaggerated appetite, excess urine, dehydration, thirst, fatigue, and there's usually two types of them. Type 1 is insulin dependent. This is where pretty much no insulin is anymore being used. It is an autoimmune disorder. And type 2 is still insulin dependent, and most of the time type 2 diabetes is pretty much diet related. Okay, and oftentimes is found in obese people and could be corrected with diet. Pancreatic glucagon. Glucagon is another hormone released by the pancreas that is produced by the alpha cells of the islets of Langerhans, and the target will be again your liver. The function will be to regulate blood glucose level again, but this time it elevates the blood glucose. Between meals, when you are hungry, the blood glucose level will drop, and glucagon is secreted to increase it. Glucagon will always allow glycogen to be broken down, so it promotes glycogenolysis, if you remember what it is. All right. Then you have the testes. The testes is secreting the hormone testosterone, and the target tissue will be most cells. It aids in sperm and reproductive organ development and function. The ovaries. produces progesterone and estrogen, and the target tissue will be most cells in the body. It is involved in urine and mammary gland development and menstrual cycle. This is not just the last gland. I went through the ovaries and the testes really very quick because we're going to go over them again in the in the last in the reproductive system. So let's move on with the thymus gland. This is secreting thymosin, which is targeting the immune system tissues. The function will be to promote immune system development and function, specifically the T cell maturation process. And I think this is already the last of the glands, the pineal gland or the pineal body. It secretes melatonin, and it is the target tissue here is the hypothalamus. It plays a role in the onset of puberty and control of the circadian rhythm, which means if you have a lot of melatonin being secreted, then you will feel tired and sleepy. Okay, so its action really is to make you really sleep. Okay, and light actually affects its function. And pretty much whenever there is no light, then you don't feel sleepy because melatonin is not being produced much. And that's it for the hormones, guys.